The morning sun cast long shadows across my backyard as I stood there, coffee mug in hand, staring at the pool that had dominated my life for the past 3 years. What had once been my pride and joy, a shimmering oasis of crystal clear water, surrounded by perfectly manicured landscaping, had become my personal albatross. The maintenance costs alone were eating through my savings like a hungry beast, and don't even get me started on the monthly chemical bills that rivaled my mortgage payment. But it wasn't just the money. It was the constant worry, the endless cycle of testing pH levels, scrubbing algae, replacing filters, and dealing with equipment failures that always seemed to happen at the worst possible moments. Last month, the pump had died during my daughter's birthday party, turning our celebration into a frantic scramble to find a repair service that would come out on a Saturday. The week before that, a leak had mysteriously appeared overnight, draining half the water and leaving me with an astronomical water bill that made my eyes water more than the chlorine ever had. I'd bought this house 5 years ago, fresh off a promotion at the marketing firm where I worked. The previous owners had installed the pool themselves. A fact I learned too late meant it wasn't up to current code standards and would require expensive upgrades if I ever wanted to make it compliant. The real estate agent had sold me on the dream. Summer barbecues, lazy afternoons floating on rafts, teaching my kids to swim in our own backyard paradise. What she hadn't mentioned was the reality of owning a pool in suburban Connecticut, where the swimming season lasted maybe 4 months if you were lucky, but the maintenance was a year-round commitment. The final straw had come 2 weeks earlier when I received a letter from the Homeowners Association, courtesy of my neighbor Karen Pemberton, citing me for unsightly pool equipment and failure to maintain aesthetic standards. Apparently, my pool heater, which was working perfectly fine but had developed some surface rust after 3 harsh winters, was now considered an eyesore that was bringing down property values. The letter demanded I either replace the unit immediately or face daily fines until the issue was resolved. Karen Pemberton. Even thinking her name made my jaw clench involuntarily. She'd moved in next door 18 months ago, arriving like a hurricane of suburban perfectionism and HOA regulations. Within her first month, she'd complained about my garbage cans being visible from the street, despite being exactly where they'd been for 4 years. My lawn being half an inch too tall according to some obscure covenant I'd never heard of, and my teenage son's friends parking on our own driveway because it disrupted the visual flow of the neighborhood. But the pool had become her obsession. She'd positioned herself as the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, and my pool had apparently become ground zero in her personal war against anything she deemed imperfect. First, it was the pool cover I used during winter. 2. Blue, apparently, and not the approved beige color outlined in subsection 47B of the HOA guidelines. Then it was the poolside furniture, which she claimed was cheap-looking and reflected poorly on the neighborhood's upscale image. When I'd installed a privacy fence last summer to create some separation between our properties, she'd filed a complaint claiming it was 6 inches too tall and violated setback requirements. The irony wasn't lost on me that Karen's own backyard was far from perfect. Her elaborate garden gnome collection would have been considered tacky by anyone's standards, and her husband's vintage car restoration project had turned their garage into a graveyard of rusted auto parts. But somehow, Karen had positioned herself as the neighborhood's aesthetic authority, wielding HOA regulations like weapons against anyone who dared to fall short of her impossible standards. Standing there that morning, watching the sunrise reflect off the water's surface, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done. Done with the endless maintenance, done with the financial drain, done with Karen's harassment, and done with letting a hole in the ground control my life. I was going to remove the pool entirely. The idea had been percolating in my mind for months, but I'd always dismissed it as too drastic, too expensive, too permanent. But as I did the math, really did the math, I realized that the cost of professional pool removal would be less than 2 years of maintenance expenses. More importantly, it would give me back my weekends, my peace of mind, and my backyard. I could landscape the space properly, maybe put in a vegetable garden or create an outdoor living area where my family could actually relax instead of constantly working. I spent the next 3 days researching pool removal companies, getting quotes, and learning about the process. There were 2 options. Partial removal, where they'd break up the top portion of the pool and fill it in with dirt, or complete removal, where they'd excavate the entire structure and haul it away. The complete removal cost nearly twice as much, but it was the only option that would allow me to fully reclaim the space and eliminate any future drainage or structural issues. By Thursday, I'd made my choice. I called Martinez Pool Services, a company with excellent reviews and reasonable prices, and scheduled the removal for the following Monday. The decision felt liberating, like finally cutting free from chains. I'd been dragging around for years. I even started sketching plans for what I'd do with the reclaimed space. Maybe a pergola with climbing roses, or a fire pit surrounded by comfortable seating where we could make s'mores on cool evenings. That weekend, I broke the news to my kids. My 16-year-old son, Jake, took it better than expected. He'd lost interest in the pool years ago and was more excited about the possibility of having space for a basketball hoop. My 12-year-old daughter, Emma, was initially disappointed, but when I explained that we'd have money for the family vacation to Disney World we'd been postponing, her attitude shifted quickly. My ex-wife, Sarah, was actually relieved when I told her during our Sunday phone call. She'd been worried about the safety liability and was tired of hearing me complain about maintenance costs every time we discussed the kids' expenses. The only person I didn't tell was Karen. Call it petty, call it strategic, but I wanted to see her reaction when the removal crew showed up Monday morning. After 18 months of her constant interference and complaints, I was looking forward to watching her realize that her campaign against my pool had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, and that the result was going to be something she definitely hadn't planned for. Sunday night, I sat on my deck with a beer, looking out at the pool for what I knew would be the last time. Despite all the frustration and expense, there were good memories there. Emma's first successful dive. Jake's pool parties with his middle school friends. Quiet evening swims when the stress of work had threatened to overwhelm me. But those memories were outweighed by the relief I felt knowing that tomorrow, this chapter of my life would literally be excavated away. I had no idea that Karen had been watching my activities all weekend through her kitchen window, noting the unusual amount of time I'd been spending on phone calls and paperwork. I had no idea that she'd already drafted another complaint letter, this one about the deteriorating condition of my pool cover and its negative impact on her property value. And I definitely had no idea that Monday morning would bring not just a pool removal crew, but a confrontation that would become neighborhood, legend, and ultimately reveal secrets that would shake our entire community to its core. As I finished my beer and headed inside, I felt nothing but anticipation for the fresh start waiting just 12 hours away. Little did I know that Karen Pemberton was about to lose her mind in ways that would make her previous complaints look like friendly suggestions, and that my simple decision to remove a pool would unleash a chain of events that would change not just my backyard, but the entire dynamics of Maple Grove Estates forever. The rumble of heavy machinery at 7:30 a.m. Monday morning was my alarm clock. I'd been awake since dawn anyway, too excited to sleep properly, but the sound of the excavator rolling down Maple Grove Lane made my heart race with anticipation. I threw on clothes and rushed outside to meet the crew from Martinez Pool Services, led by a weathered man named Miguel, who'd been removing pools for over 20 years. "You sure about this?" Miguel asked as we walked around the pool's perimeter, his experienced eyes assessing the job ahead. "It's a nice setup you got here. Shame to see it go." "I'm sure," I replied, probably with more conviction than necessary. "It's time." What I didn't notice in my excitement was Karen's face pressed against her kitchen window, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to something approaching horror as she realized what was happening. By the time Miguel's crew had unloaded their equipment and begun setting up barriers around the work area, Karen was standing at her back door in her bathrobe, coffee mug forgotten in her hand. The first sign of trouble came at exactly 8:15 a.m., when my doorbell rang with the urgency of someone reporting a fire. I opened it to find Karen, now fully dressed in her usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest, her face flushed with indignation. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pushing past me into my foyer without invitation. "Good morning to you too, Karen. I'm having my pool removed." "You can't just remove a pool without HOA approval. There are procedures, permits, environmental impact studies." Her voice was rising with each word, and I could hear Miguel's crew had stopped their prep work, probably listening to what was quickly becoming a full-scale meltdown. "Actually, I can," I said calmly, pulling out the folder of paperwork I'd prepared for exactly this moment. "I checked all the regulations. Pool. Removal is considered maintenance and improvement, not construction. No HOA approval required." Karen snatched the papers from my hands, her eyes scanning desperately for some violation, some loophole she could exploit. This is going to destroy property values. You can't just dig up your entire backyard without considering how it affects the rest of us." "Funny, that's not what you said when you were complaining about the pool's condition every other week. I never said to remove it entirely. I said to maintain it properly, to upgrade it to acceptable standards." She was practically shrieking now, and I could see Miguel approaching my front door, probably concerned about the commotion. "Everything okay in there?" Miguel called through the screen door. "Fine," I replied. "Just discussing the project with my neighbor." Karen whirled around as if noticing Miguel for the first time. "You! Stop whatever you're doing right now! This is illegal! I'm calling the police!" Miguel, who'd clearly dealt with difficult neighbors before, just shrugged. "Lady, we got all our permits. This is a legitimate job." That's when Karen made her first tactical error. Instead of retreating to regroup and research her options, she decided to escalate immediately. She stormed out of my house and positioned herself directly in front of the excavator, arms crossed like some sort of suburban Tiananmen Square protester. "I will not allow this destruction to proceed," she announced to the crew, the neighbors who were starting to gather, and apparently the universe in general. Miguel looked at me with raised eyebrows. "We can't work with someone standing in the equipment zone. It's a safety violation." "Karen," I said, walking over to where she'd planted herself, "you need to move. This is private property, and you're interfering with contracted work. I am protecting this neighborhood's investment. Someone has to think about the long-term consequences of your selfish decision." That's when Mrs. Henderson from across the street called out, "What long-term consequences? It's his pool." And Mr. Rodriguez from 2 houses down added, "Maybe, if you'd stop harassing everyone, people wouldn't want to get rid of nice things just to avoid dealing with you." I watched Karen's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine, surprise, anger, indignation, and something that looked almost like panic. She wasn't used to other neighbors challenging her authority, and the public nature of this confrontation was clearly rattling her. "You don't understand," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "This pool, it can't be removed. It just can't." There was something in her tone that made everyone pause. It wasn't the usual entitled anger we'd all grown accustomed to. This was different. This was fear. "Why not?" I found myself asking, genuinely curious now. Karen looked around at the growing crowd of neighbors, at Miguel's crew standing by with their equipment, at the excavator that was going to tear into the earth in a matter of minutes. For a moment, I thought she might actually explain herself. Instead, she did something none of us expected. She started crying. Not elegant tears, or dramatic sobbing, but ugly, desperate crying like a child who'd been caught in a lie that was too big to explain. The kind of crying that made everyone uncomfortable and shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. "Karen," I said softly, "what's really going on here?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara across her cheek. "You don't understand. When they break up the concrete, they're going to find..." She stopped herself, but it was too late. Everyone was staring now, waiting for her to finish that sentence. "Find what?" Mrs. Henderson asked. Miguel, who'd been in this business long enough to have heard everything, stepped forward. "Ma'am, if there's something buried near this pool that we should know about, you need to tell us now. We hit utility lines, we hit septic systems, we hit all kinds of things, but we need to know what we're dealing with." Karen's composure cracked completely. "It's not what you think. It was an accident, and it was so long ago, and I never meant for anyone to get hurt, and I thought if the pool just stayed there forever, no one would ever have to know." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the construction crew had gone completely quiet. sensing they were witnessing something far more significant than a neighborhood dispute over landscaping. I felt my stomach drop as the implications of her words sank in. "Karen, what did you do?" She collapsed onto my lawn, her perfectly pressed khakis now stained with grass and dirt, her HOA polo shirt wrinkled beyond repair. "It was 15 years ago, before you moved here, before any of you moved here. The Johnsons lived in your house. Then, and they had that pool party for their daughter's graduation." She took a shuddering breath. "There was this boy, Tommy Martinez. No relation," she added, glancing at Miguel, who was now listening with professional intensity. "He was drunk and he was being stupid, and he kept bothering Sarah Johnson, wouldn't leave her alone even when she told him to stop." The name clicked in my memory. I'd heard whispers about a young man who'd gone missing from the neighborhood years ago, but I'd assumed it was just one of those unsolved cases that every community seems to have. "I was house-sitting for the Weatherbys next door while they were in Europe," Karen continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I saw him following Sarah into the pool house, and I could hear her telling him no, telling him to leave her alone. So I went over to help." She looked up at all of us, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I just meant to scare him off. I grabbed a pool skimmer, one of those long metal ones, and I went to confront him. But he turned around so fast and he was so drunk, and when I pushed him away from Sarah, he fell backward and hit his head on the concrete edge of the pool." The crowd was frozen, hanging on every word of this confession that none of us had been prepared to hear. "He was unconscious, bleeding. Sarah was screaming. I knew I should call an ambulance, call the police, but I panicked. I'd been drinking, too, and I thought they'd blame me, thought they'd say I'd assaulted him. So Sarah and we pulled him into the pool house and waited to see if he'd wake up." Miguel had pulled out his phone and was quietly making a call, probably to the police, but Karen was too deep in her confession to notice. "But he didn't wake up. He died there in the pool house, and we panicked even more. Sarah's parents were out of town, the party guests had all left, and we were alone with a dead body. We didn't know what to do, so we buried him." "Where?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Under the pool," she whispered. "We dug down about 6 feet in what would become the deep end, put him there, and then the Johnsons had the pool installation. Finished 2 weeks later. The concrete went right over everything." The weight of this revelation settled over everyone like a blanket. Tommy Martinez hadn't run away from home as everyone had assumed. He'd been under my pool for the past 15 years, and I'd been swimming over his grave every summer without knowing it. "Sarah Johnson moved away right after graduation," Karen continued. "Went to college in California and never came back. But I stayed. I got married, bought the house next door, and I've been living with this secret ever since. When you moved in and started using the pool, I thought I was going to go crazy. Every time I heard splashing, every time you had people over, I felt like I was going to throw up." Mrs. Henderson spoke first. "So all this time, all your complaints about the pool, I was trying to make it so unpleasant that you'd stop using it. I thought if I could make pool ownership miserable enough,